What's going on, guys? This is a compilation, part one of everything Bigfoot. Enjoy, guys.
It's very, very dangerous.
Get these spidey sense, I was like, oh, something's off.
And I'm just like, man, I'm waiting to hear something,
Get that crowd warmed up. There's Mr. Yehola Tiger.
What's going on, guys? I am your host, Yehola Tiger. A listener, who I would consider a friend. We've been talking back and forth on some things, and he decided to kind of share some stories. And his name is Derek Morris. He's Eastern Band Cherokee from the Tennessee, North Carolina border area. He doesn't live too far from the Appalachian Trail, so I'm going to have some stories from him, and that's basically going to, be the crux of the episode. I'm going to chime in on a few things, but before we get to Derek, I was just kind of, as I go throughout my week and I think about, our watch shows. I don't know if you guys watch the show Survivor, and it's Survivor 43, I believe. I'm getting to the point with Survivor that it's just booty cheeks. It's like people my age who grew up on Survivor and they're trying to do the Survivory things. Drives me absolutely crazy. And they ended the season basically, the most unlikely to win won, and that's been the kind of the thing over the last two seasons. But I mentioned that and kind of critiquing that. Another show that I kind of made me really think really hard is I've caught up on the latest episodes of Yellowstone. And one of the underlying storylines of Yellowstone is this battle for the chief or for the chairman of the tribe that they have in Yellowstone. And I'm not going to say this is what's wrong with Indian country and Indian communities and things like that. But the grab for power and, I guess the old guard, being kind of threatened by the new guard or the new way of things. And I think one thing too, that they kind of get it right in all honesty. I see that in Indian country now, just here in Oklahoma. You see kind of a shift, a change in attitudes and perspectives, and some things are good, other things are kind of okay, whatever. But the reason why I bring that up is it's kind of interesting from that show to see that kind of, I guess, dare I say, dynamic. Because I'm not gonna lie to y'all, and us Indians out here, we know we can be haters of our own people. And we don't, we always kind of, they ain't doing that great now, kind of downplaying. And I think that's one thing that I've noticed, just to kind of general, everybody's kind of nice to each other, to their face and to the public. And I see kind of the things that happen behind the scenes on some things. And I think that's kind of what Yellowstone is, whoever, Taylor Sheridan, if he had some real Indians coming in through there and say, hey, this is how we are to each other. I believe 100% in supporting each other, and that's kind of my thing. But I just thought it was kind of interesting to watch that show and kind of see the dynamics between, tribal members, but then also to tribal members and non-tribal members. And that's one of my favorite shows just because, I love the ceremonies they do, and they talk about those ceremonies. Like the burial ceremony, I know northern tribes and northwest tribes, I know they do things like that. And for her to cut her hair off, I was like, man, that means that's something right there. That's moving. That means something real, happened. And the funny part in one of the latest episodes when Casey's wife, Monica, when their little boy died, John, Rip the cowboy asked I can't think of his name in the show. But he goes, well, why do y'all do that? He goes, I don't have to tell you, or something along the lines of like, I don't really have to answer you. I don't have to tell you. And Rip kind of smiles like, yeah, that's your people, So, there's a lot of things that I like about Yellowstone that kind of makes me really, kind of think about some things. And I just thought I'd throw that out there. When I saw that dynamic, I said, I kind of see that, here in Oklahoma with different things. And, it is what it is. Some people are probably going to be like, dang, he really hating on us. But, it's just an observation that I have. And I'm full of observations that I notice things. But like I said, this episode, I'm going to go ahead and move it forward here. This episode, like I said, Derek Morris, I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you sharing your stories and kind of giving some insight of what you kind of think Bigfoot is, and what some of these other entities are, or kind of the different types of Bigfoot, or whatever these creatures can be. But I appreciate it. I'm going to turn this over to Derek now.
Sio negad dawage dawado chi j lage. Hello everybody. My name is Derek. Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. These stories are coming from, if you look at the map, they're very northeastern corner of Tennessee, right near the North Carolina border. I've got a couple of Bigfoot stories for you. Sasquatch, Nanyunwe, Uniwadowahi. It's got many names and many cultures. But this first story was told to me by my uncle. So I get into it. He tells me this happened in probably the early 80s, probably around September or October in deer season. He was out hunting. And he says to me, hey, I was out hunting, and I kept getting a nervous feeling that I was being watched or something was following me. Kept looking around and never saw anything. Didn't really hear anything either, but he just couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. So after a long morning of not seeing any deer or anything, he finally decided to head back home, and he crossed a barbed wire fence. He pushed the middle strand down and crawled through, and came up and started going up a little hill, and he just got the feeling hit him real hard again to something was watching him, and to turn around. So finally he turned around, and he said he saw this big hairy beast, this creature, just step over the fence, like maybe we would step over a kid's toy in the floor, just like it was not really nothing. But it stepped over, and it stopped and looked at him, and he looked at the creature, and he said it was just frozen. It was petrified. It was scared to death. And so finally the creature, he just threw his leg back over the fence, and it stepped all the way over the fence and just walked off into the woods. And he said, I've saw a lot of things, but that time I was so scared. I'd never been that scared before. So I thought that was a pretty cool story. I'd had him tell a couple of friends that same story, and he's always told it the same way. So this uncle, he's pretty no-nonsense guy, he's straight up, and honestly, I believe him. He seemed kind of rattled when he would tell the story, kind of nervous, but he's got no reasons to make things up. So that was one story.
So that's the first story that Derek has shared. But kind of piggyback on what his story. There's been times, like at my parents' house back when we used to have a dog named Luke. My dad would go out into the woods that we have surrounding the house, and he'd go out there and cut wood. And there'd be times where out of nowhere, my dad would stop cutting wood, or he's messing with the chainsaw, and that dog would go kind of on his haunches and look. And my dad would listen, and the forest would be dead quiet. So, I really appreciate him telling that story, because that's a lot of that, when animals go quiet like that, it means there's a predator around. And that's usually kind of the key to where if something's around. But I'm going to kick it right back over to Derek. But I just thought I'd, mention that real quick because I just thought that was really interesting. You know, that kind of that it's almost like a warning, like, you know, when it goes quiet like that, something's around. But here's Derek again.
Another Sasquatch story that I have, this happened to me, of course, the same area here in Tennessee, North Carolina border. This was about 2006. It was December, and this was back when I smoked cigarettes. So I would go outside, you know, to smoke my cigarettes because my wife didn't smoke, and I didn't want her to have to smell my bad habits. So I was outside. It was probably about 9 o'clock, 9:20 at night, and I was out smoking the last cigarette for the day. It's time to go to bed, to get up early and go to work the next morning. But I was out there and smoking, sitting on my steps, and maybe I'm going to say maybe an eighth of a mile ahead, the way I was facing, I lived on a dead-end road, and the road dead end because it went up the mountain. You know, it stopped at the base of the mountain. So about an eighth of a mile up from where I was sitting, I just started hearing some kind of, it sounded like monkeys just woofing and chuffing and barking and just wah, 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 you know, just going off. And it was so loud. I remember I was in shock when I heard that. Because I've been outside, you know, and hunting and fishing and all that all my life, man. I grew up here, but I'd never heard that before. So I don't know what that was. I'm not saying it's a Sasquatch or something like that, but it sounded, like I said, it sounded like monkeys. You know, it sounded like two monkeys. One would go off, and then over to the right from it was a higher pitched one. Maybe a female or something, I don't know, but it would they would do a back and forth exchange, maybe 4 or 5 minutes. But I was stunned, man. I was shocked. I was like, what in the world is this racket, man? It didn't sound like any other animal that I'd heard.
Wow. I mean, imagine hearing that. Imagine hearing it sound like monkeys basically in the woods. And you're in the middle of like, you know, North Carolina, Tennessee, and like you're just hanging out, chimps. But Derek has shared quite a few different types of audios from the Unsolved Mysteries of the Reservation podcast. He shared quite a few things, and I'm going to play an audio that was on Unsolved Mysteries of the Reservation podcast. I'm going to play that now. Yeah, like I said, he's shared, you know, that audio clip, and then he's also shared, you know, pictures, and he actually has a video of eyeshine that he sent us, and man, I can't believe, I was like, dang, that's pretty clear, you know, that's pretty stinking clear. But I'm going to get back to his stories. This is his final story, and he kind of goes into what he kind of thinks Bigfoot, Sasquatch, what he thinks that is.
This was another story that I've not really told many people this, but all I can tell you is what I saw. I woke up for work one morning. I was going down the road. You know, it was dark, of course, maybe 4:30, 4:40 a.m. And I go the same way to work every day. You know, just one way down the mountain. And I come around this blind corner, and I don't know, but all I know is I saw on the left-hand side of the road, beside a fence post and a fence, there was a tall, hairy figure standing right beside the road. And it was huge. I mean, it was kind of a grayish color, kind of a silverish gray, kind of like maybe charcoal gray. but its face it looked like its hair was hanging down its face, like matted looking. So the face kind of looked messed up, like just all matted and unkept hair. And the reason why I don't tell this story much, this thing stepped over the fence, and once it kicked its other leg up over the fence, it took about 2 steps. There was a big open field behind it. There was no trees or no ditches or embankments or anything. It took about 2 steps, and the only thing that I can say is it just stopped being there. It disappeared, or whatever you want to call it. It was just not there anymore. And I've never saw things, that like hallucinations. I've never done that. I was just on my way to work, but the second that I saw it, I was just shocked. Like this fear came over me like I'd never experienced before. I've saw bear and all the usual animals around here, but just that it was almost like terror, the sheer terror. The second I saw that, just I couldn't believe what I was seeing. But like I said, it took about 2 steps, and then it was like somebody flicked a light switch. It was that quick. It didn't like vanish into a puff of smoke or nothing like that. No, it was slow, but it was just instant, just and gone. I don't know what that was. I understand Bigfoot itself is hard enough for most people to believe, but to say, oh, not only I saw a Bigfoot, I also saw one disappear. But I don't know. I'm not an expert on the subject. I just know what I saw. Like I said, I'm out hiking and fishing and things like that a lot. I found tracks, tracks that I can't explain. Just look like a big person's footprint. I found the stick structures, and I've heard some crazy howls and hoops and hollers and things like that. I live about 15 minutes from the Appalachian Trail, so we're often up there walking around and just enjoying being outside. The weather, I think, unlike today, it's raining. You can maybe hear that. But what Bigfoot is, I don't know, man. Some people say, oh, it's interdimensional, and some people say, oh, it's a flesh and blood creature. But me, humans, when you think about it, humans are both. Mankind is both. We are all spiritual beings. We're all very physical beings. So maybe it's just another kind of person. The Uniwado Wahi, that means the mystic tribe. A lot of people say, oh, they're just another tribe of people. When you see them, to turn around and walk away because they don't like us that much. Maybe they see what we're doing to our planet, and they don't like that. I don't know. As far as like a government, some people say, oh, the government is making them, or they're a government experiment gone wrong. I don't really believe that, because these were reported, like Vikings saw them, and people a long time ago, by 1600s, there's reports. So I'm pretty sure there wasn't a government back then. But what they are, I couldn't really say. Maybe they are just another tribe of people. But I thank you for the time and for listening to me. Talk to you later. Bye.
We talked in episode 2 of Bigfoot and medicine, and they do those things. I know he hasn't really told that story to the public, but I'd have to say, when I speak to him, I 100% believe that they can do those things. He mentioned a lost tribe. Like I said, in episode 2, I think, like I said, I agree with a lot of things that he's saying. Maybe that's Cherokee thing, I don't know, but I know that a lot of people think that this thing is like I said, a government or conspiracy. This thing has been around for a long time. One thing that I'm always so curious about when it comes to Sasquatch, Bigfoot, the Yeti, things like this. I always hear non-natives talking about cloaking, and I hear them say, things like, "Oh, well, they just disappeared," and one thing that I'm always so intrigued by is to hear that kind of philosophy, that it's some type of out of this world, never never has been done. No one knows how it's done. And I'm sitting over here as a native, as an Indian person. I know what that is. So the topic today is Bigfoot and medicine. And you're like, I'm sure people are probably like, what are you talking about, medicine? My thought is, and this is what I believe. I believe that Bigfoot or Sasquatch can do medicine. Here's the example that I have in my head where I'm just kind of like sitting back like, You look at the tribes and how the medicine that we have nowadays is not as strong as medicine, in older days, older days. I equate that to Sasquatch, Bigfoot as well. Because as you notice, a generation dies, you lose something, another generation dies, you lose something. And I always think it's kind of interesting to think of it like that. Because the medicine's not as strong now. Now, don't get me wrong, and if you practice, I'm not saying I ain't saying come put it on me, because I don't know, I want no parts of that. But what I'm saying is that I think that they knew things, of herbal, herbs and herbal type of medicine, and they had the ability to do things. And so I look at it as the same thing, kind of similar to what we're going through as natives here nowadays. Is they probably had some pretty strong medicine back in the day, because that's what they had to do to treat wounds. They had to, they were looked upon as another clan, another tribe. And there's got to be a reason behind that, and I believe it's because they practice things too, like us. And I always, kind of think about, a story that was told to me growing up is about Tito Harjo. It was always told by, we had I had a family member who was in with the snakes with him, Edward Scott. And I had been told growing up that Tito, when he was out there, that he was taught medicine by Sasquatch Bigfoot. And I 100% believe that could be why he evaded capture for so long. And that's kind of a theory that I have. There may be popular opinion. I ain't heard anybody be talking about it, but I always kind of think about that a little bit, And I'm going to play a clip right here from, if you guys have seen this movie, I had mentioned it on Unsolved Mysteries of the Reservation, but it's a clip from Bigfootville. And it's basically Tim Harjo with another elder talking about, kind of magic is what he called it. But here, I'm going to roll that clip now.
They have magic. Magic able to disappear. Because even when the non-natives, they chase this thing, I noticed that the natives, that the Indian people, when we see it, we kind of get scared of it. But yet, we don't bother it.
He lives underground, and he comes out only at nighttime. He doesn't, if people, put a light on them, they'll disappear in the woods. They even had helicopters, to look for it. They never did find it. And there's it. It just disappeared in the river bottom.
And so it knows it's in danger, and it uses its magic to get away. A part of a hypnosis stage that it puts people in. and to where it could be standing right there in front of you and you still wouldn't see it.
Mike Woolley and his famous Bigfoot encounter. I'm also going to tell, different stories and things that's happened to myself or family members and people like that, or stories that I've heard from people telling me. And so where this story takes place, and I cannot for the life of me, and I tried to look this up and I can't find it. I want to say it's in the Carolinas area, Tennessee, North Carolina, that area. So Mike Woolley had been hunting this part of land for a while, but he only had hunted it. I mean, he had over the course of a span of years he's hunted this thing, but he's only hunted it like 5 times in total. And he usually, when he does hunt this, he does it usually in the morning time. Well, then he had some stuff come up on this day, and I want to say the date that he went out on his encounter was like maybe in February, I believe. Anyways, but so he had some stuff that he had to do during the day. So he was like, I'm gonna go out and hunt in the evening time, which he's never done at this property. Well, on this property, there's only one way in, one way out, and the road is one of those old logging roads that's very, very narrow. And when you go to a certain point in the road, there's only one spot where you can turn around, especially if you're in a big truck. And unfortunately, Mike Woolley was in a big truck that day. So every time that he hunted that property, he always at that little turnout spot, he would basically turn around and back his truck all the way back up into the end of the road. And he was kind of not really expecting anything, especially in the evening times, because he didn't really think that he would get anything because it was rutting season. Things like I said, I'm not a deer hunter or anything, but he in that area he noticed that in the evening times it was more kind of tough to get something. Well, so he goes down there and backs his truck up, and he gets out, and he had this tree stand that basically it was like 2 poles into the ground, and it was like a triangle basically. So it kind of wrapped around the tree, but it was like next to the tree, and basically the stand, about 10 foot off the ground, and with a ladder and all that stuff. So like one of those more kind of older school type of deer stands. And so he's sitting there, and he's been there maybe 5 minutes, and he notices a doe come up, like running really fast, and is underneath the deer stand. And he looks down and he realizes that the deer was sweating. Like it was just it was like wore out. It had been being chased for a while. And he saw the sweat, and the doe was panting, and he thought that was kind of strange. But then he also kind of realized too, like I mentioned before, it was rutting season. And so he's kind of like, well, maybe there was a big buck after her, or maybe there's multiple bucks after her. So he's sitting there and he's kind of looking, and all of a sudden he hears, and it was almost like he called it almost like a freight train, but kind of, like something was coming their way through, through the thick brush. And the path there's a path that gets to that stand, but all around the path, it's all like really tall trees and briar, really 4-inch, briar, stickers. He said basically if any man went through there, he'd be all cut up and be in bad shape. And so he looks up and he sees this black kind of shape making its way, it's hiding kind of behind this little small tree. And so he's looking, he's like, what the hell is that? What is that? And he didn't think to look through his scope, but he kind of was watching it, and next thing he knows, this creature jumps, literally no running start, and this is how he explained it: no running start. It didn't use the tree to bounce off. He said it jumped 20 feet to this bigger tree that was off the way, because this just game trail was kind of a wider game trail. And it jumped to this other big, really big tree. And he's like, we're sitting here watching this thing do this. Well, the doe is still underneath the tree. And the whole time, and this, by the way, this counter lasted about 15 minutes. And to me, what kind of gets me kind of spooked out was when he finally decided to pull the scope up. What he saw was basically a Bigfoot, Sasquatch. And when he put his scope on the face of this thing, he said it looked human. Like it looked legitimately human. And in his mind, he starts thinking of like, okay, is this feral people? Like, did the circus get out? Like the circus, like, that's so funny. I always hear that like kind of excuse where, oh, it's just the circus. You heard about those monkeys that got loose. Like, all right. But yeah, he started going through it and he's like, well, he said, let me take let me really hone in on this thing, because he was going to shoot this thing because he wasn't sure what it was, but he said it looked too human. And so he had kind of, like I said, he had really started scoping this thing out. And he was describing in the interview, and then I've read an article about this, that the eyes were like solid black. Like he could barely see any white, or if he couldn't remember if he could see any white, but it was basically black eyes on this thing. He said the nose didn't looked human, like it had a human looking nose. The teeth were kind of squared off, like not like how chimpanzees have kind of like canine teeth. Like it's like squared off like how humans have our teeth are. And he was like, man, this might be really human. Like I don't want to shoot this thing if it tries to attack me, because I could go to jail for murder. He's real kind of contemplating. Well, at the time that he was using the scope, this thing started growling at him, and it was he equated it to like if 5 lions were like, the African lions were, growling at him and kind of, using their kind of the infrasound type, stuff that those animals use. He said it felt like a wind hit him, and it kind of disoriented him. And he said that he kind of, in his mind, it felt like time slowed down. And he was really almost like it was like everything was still, but he was still moving at normal, speed. And he said that this thing was growling, and you could see its teeth. It kept showing its teeth like a chimp would do, like when it does like its nose, like crinkles his nose. It kind of starts showing his teeth, and he said it had squared off teeth. So then he started looking at the body, and the body was completely covered in hair, and he basically just saw the broad shoulders, and it said it looked like a human head with a gorilla body. And this part of the story is literally is a nightmare for me. Like, so out of nowhere, he hears this whistle, and I've had family members tell me about this whistle. I've heard this whistle when I'm out in the woods. And it's not like a whistle, like a sharp one. It's like a faint whistle. It's really kind of like it carries, the wind carries the whistle through the woods. And he heard that. And he kind of looked over to his, off kind of behind him. And he's like, where did that whistle come from? Like, that sounded like I've heard that before. All while this thing is in front of him, he looks, and he's, like I said, he kind of looked, and then he looked back at the scope, and this thing's eyes moved kind of off to the right. So it'd be, so off to it's left, but his right. And he's like, okay, what was that? And all of a sudden, the thing, like the creature whistled back to wherever that was coming from. And he's like, oh no, he's like, what is this, like like he started really kind of thinking like, man, are they communicating with each other? Like what's going on with that? Like there's another one. And when he goes kind of like looks back, and he looks back into the scope, that one that whistled back to the whistle was smirking at him. And it had this look like, you're in trouble, buddy. Like, it's over for you. And he said literally this thing was smirking at him. Like, he said he couldn't believe it, because it was like it knew, like it had the upper hand. And it was going to get him. I got goosebumps telling that, because, man, I can imagine just being up in that tree stand and seeing that thing, and it's looking at you like if Michael Jordan was looking at you and you're down 35 points, and Scottie Pippen and Kobe Bryant were all on the same team. Shaq were all on the same team, and you're like, dang, like it's over for me. You know, like they about to really beat me down. But like he said that like this thing just kept smirking at him, and he said it's real sinister. Like it was like if you're looking at like something that's real hungry. You know, like if you're real hungry, you look at something, you're like, man, I'm about to tear that up. And he said it looked like that for a little, like for basically the entire time. So then it whistles again, and all of a sudden he hears movement behind him. So he's in this tree stand, his back is against the tree, and behind him he could hear faint, like it was 2 steps, and it wasn't like it was coming fast. It was like it was sneaking up on him. And so this thing is trying to distract him by smirking and kind of like taunting him, so this one behind him can get him. And so Mike is like, well, all right, I think it's time for me to try to make a run for it. So he gets down that stand, and he's running basically back to his truck through this little trail. And when he does that, this creature that was in front of him takes off into the brush, into the briars. And it's literally within 50 feet of him. And I forgot to mention this. This whole encounter is about 15 yards away. So basically almost a first down in football. That's not that far. And so this thing, he kind of goes off and juts off into the path, getting back to his truck. This thing goes into the briars, and it's mowing trees down, ripping trees up, and it's mowing. And he says that he could literally feel how close this thing is. And he gets to his truck. Or he's about to his truck, and he realizes, like, if I try to get my keys out of my pocket, open the door, unlock the door, or unlock the door, open the door, start the truck, this thing's going to bust through the thing and get me. So he takes a pop shot, just trying to, maybe distract it or something. And so he shoots, and this thing was probably about 8 foot tall. He shot about 7 foot, and it was about 3 feet away from that thing's face. And when he shot the tree, it almost was like an explosion of dust in this thing's face. And because it was a real old oak tree. And so they take off, he takes off, and he gets to the truck, and he takes off, and he's, going like smoking out of there, like just going crazy, like making sure he got out of there. And out of his rearview mirror, he saw one hand try to grab the tailgate, like it was going to climb in the truck. But luckily it missed. Like you could see, he said he could just see the fingers kind of like it was trying to grab it, but he took off and it missed. And so he said as he was, kind of taking off around the curve, because this is like I said, it's a straight shot, but there's a curve toward when you get towards the end of it. He said he almost got to the curve and he could see there was another one. There was another one. And he had no idea it was right behind him the whole time. And that was the one he thinks that was the one that was trying to get into the truck, at the back of the truck. And he got out of there, and people asked him, it's one thing too that I like when I listened to the interview, and he talked to some Eastern Band Cherokees about this. And basically they said that in that area, those Sasquatch, the Eastern Band believes that they can speak Cherokee and that they look Cherokee. And he did it like over the course of the years. He's done like artist sketches, and he's taken it to these different tribes, often like kind of on that in that area, and they're like, yeah, that looks Cherokee. Like there's some Cherokee blood in there. There ain't someone out here wilding out. In the words of Tyler Randall, Bigfoot's Wild Weekend Part 9. Nah. But or Omaha in that cave. Primal rage. But yeah, so they said that it looks kind of Cherokee. And so I was like, man, that's kind of crazy, that he has kind of reached out to some tribes and he's told the tribes these stories. Well, he, kind of goes to other Bigfoot researchers and they said, well, no, they were just bluff charging you. They were, and he tries to tell these people like, no, this thing tried to kill me. It tried to eat me. Like, no, these things were not playing. Like, they were not doing trying to get you out of the area. Like, nah. He said they were coming for me. And he thinks it all started, what started the interaction with them doing that was him when he pointed his rifle at him to look into the scope. And so, that's a famous Bigfoot story that's been around for, a while. I think that happened in the 90s. But Mike Woolley didn't really want to come out and say anything about it because you know how people are when you tell stories sometimes, or, they don't believe you or you're crazy or, but a lot of the stuff that he talks about, a lot of people have had those experiences with this creature. I've heard stories, I mentioned on the Navajo Ranger episode that, they were beating on the doors and they're beating on Brenda Harris's doors and trailer and, and they kind of, and they do things like that. And, a story that comes to mind that was told to me not here recently from my parents kind of reminds me of, kind of what that could be or what something is. But my mom was born and raised in the country. That's basically all she knows. And she's been out in the woods, her entire life and messing around. And she said the only time that, I'm pretty spooked out at my parents' house. Like there's some weird things out there. And my mom's not really, she always likes to think, it could be this, could be that. Well, one night, my dad was watching TV and he was in the living room. And how you have the living room, and then right behind the couch is the back door that goes to the pasture. And it goes back out to the woods. Well, on the right hand side, I think I've told this story before on Unsolved Mysteries of the Reservation, but off to the right there's these woods, and there's a big old tree that you can see it at all those woods. That's right against the fence. One night she was laying there, and I think I was out of the house by that point, and they never told me this story. I guess maybe kind of creeped me out, but she was laying there watching TV, about to go to bed, and she said she saw someone trying to look into the window of the door. So basically, when you go out the back door, there's another door, and then you step further out, and then that's the tree line. Well, there's two doors, which is, I don't know why they did that, but there's two doors that lead into my parents' room and then into the living room. And they looked, and she said she looked, and she said she saw someone. It was someone big, like really big. Like she could see the outline of this thing, and it was monstrous. And it was trying to look in on them, or her. She screamed. My dad, he's like, what's going on? There's somebody out there, somebody out there. He went out there, and there was nobody there. And my mom always tries to say it was my dad. My dad was like, nah, I was sitting down in the living room with the TV on and the light was on. So they do things like that. I don't know what that was, but I was still, they're always messing around, messing with me, knocking on windows. But my dad he's kind of trickster like that, or kind of mess around. But these things do those, type of things. Like I've heard, I've told the story before too, but I've heard, a story about my dad's best friend saw one night out there where the Cherokee Nation Casino is now, the big new nice one as you're coming into town on the right. There used to be a golf course out over there, and there was a road that went behind it. The road still goes behind it, I believe, or it's connected now. But yeah, it was basically all just hills, and it was an old golf course. And he saw something pass behind him, real big and hairy. And they do those things to your mind. Mike Woolley did say, he kind of, when it grunted at him, kind of hit him with something. They do those things to your mind. They scramble you. They kind of make you lose your mind. And I think that's a part of what they do is, to stay kind of hidden and kind of stay protected, is to do those things to people. And I know one of the biggest episodes I've done is the Bigfoot medicine. And if you want to kind of hear some more about the kind of that side of it, check that episode out. It's episode 2. It's called Bigfoot Medicine. But it's really interesting, though, that story about Mike Woolley, him kind of changing things up. And that's usually how, and that's one thing I notice about a lot of these stories that, people tell, or like when they see Sasquatch, is like they change the routine up. Like most times people go in the mornings and hunt, or they'll go in the evening times, and they stick to that. But he didn't. And I thought that was real, kind of interesting when it comes to kind of were creatures of habit, but they are too. They could be that could have been their hunting ground. That could have been that time of the day where they push game up through that game trail and get them. They're known as the Navajo Rangers. It's and I may butcher their names, but it's Stan Milford and Jonathan Redbird Dover, and they have been given talks for kind of around different paranormal conferences and whatnot for quite a bit of time, like maybe 3, 4, 5, even 7 years. And I heard about these guys from I don't know how I caught it, but it was a paranormal conference that went live on YouTube back about 5, 7 years ago. And I had caught Jonathan Dover's presentation. And so how they started was in 2000, basically in the year 2000. They were both given to a special projects group. Both, federal, got federal ties, a lot of training. They, are very good police guys, detectives. They worked in homicide. Like, they did a lot of stuff in their career before this special projects assignment that they were given. And, in 2000 they were put together, and they had been solving and, investigating paranormal cases. This is, Jonathan Dover's retired, but Stan Milford, I think he's still going, which, shout out to Stan Milford. He's from Tahlequah. I was like, man, because when I heard that, I said, oh yeah, I knew he was a real one. No, but I had heard about these guys for a while, and so, one thing I found was so interesting about them is the fact that they cover things that are not really talked about. Like, if you typed in on YouTube right now, Native American folklore stories, or whatever that phrase that you can use, it's a lot of people that aren't in the culture and a lot of people that are not native speaking on native topics. And one thing I think that they both do a really good job is that they know what they're doing, they know what they're talking about, and they've experienced it. And to me, it's so fascinating, especially with the kind of stuff that they were doing. And they got their start in 2000. Well, their first case was a Bigfoot case, and they investigated it. Basically, what they did is they tracked this animal all the way out to this creek. And, came across, basically it was like a bundle of hair on the barbed wire. And they went and took it and got it DNA tested, and basically the only thing that came back was a possible carnivore, unknown carnivore. Which, I was, listening to people ask questions to him, and they said, what does that mean? And he goes, I don't know, I'm not, he just kind of laughs and I'm not the lab guy. Which makes sense, you're just basically sending it off. But, I thought it was really interesting, because he just, when they sent that in, and, there's been other, people that have sent in hair samples and alleged feces samples, and it's come back kind of weird. Some people's gotten back, normal animal, but, it's always it's always an unknown species, type of thing. And I thought it was really interesting that he sent it in, on their first case. And I have a cousin that moved from Oklahoma City to Clearview, and this was back in the late 90s. He moved into an area the locals called the Bottoms. He says that Bigfoot was always lurking around, messing with his animals, and so he decided to shoot it. And I can't remember, in the email, so he can't remember exactly what the caliber he used to shoot that his cousin used to shoot this Bigfoot. But he said it went down screaming and crazy and took off into the woods and just went crazy in the woods. But he said later that night it came back and tore up the barn, fence, and his kid's swing set. He said he twisted the legs. This thing just went crazy all over their property and their stuff. It really messed with his cousin. But he said that no one around him believed Bigfoot would tore up his property, and so he moved away into the town of Clearview, and he really swore it happened. So, we always hear that in different communities in the Bigfoot community. I know like there's a lot of people that say if you shoot these things, they will come back with a vengeance if you don't kill it. But one thing that I've heard just in, like I said, the community that people always talking about is these things don't come in ones. They don't come like by themselves. It's always like kind of in a family group, or I don't really know what I'd call it. But they do come back, and they do have kind of emotions, and that goes back to kind of talking about Bigfoot being kind of a clan or a tribe. They don't run in ones. So that's a really interesting story that his cousin shot that. Next story I got for you guys. So this comes out of Garfield County, Oklahoma, in the late 70s. And this was sent to me, and I think she wanted to remain anonymous. But this story was sent, like I said, in the 70s when she was 10 years old. So one night, her and her siblings were walking down a railroad track gravel part of the railroad track. And they had been walking there for quite a while, and they're kind of making their way down, and after a few minutes they started hearing footsteps, like that gravel type footstep kind of. And she suddenly turned around and looked, and there was nothing there. And she looked all the way down, all the way down the track, and couldn't see anything. Kept going, and eventually she thought that she saw a tall, dark, shadow type man that was dashing behind the trees, following him. And she looked several times back, thinking it was a man that was, messing with them or kind of, but the dark shadow kept peeking out from behind, a tree that was next to the railroad track behind them. And so they would walk, and then after a few minutes, they'd stop and they'd hear those footsteps again. And she writes, these were unmistakable footsteps, and saw nothing. Quoted as saying, basically one of the most terrifying, experiences she's had, because literally, she was thinking it was a part of her imagination. As being a little kid, always kind of thinking that you have, you think you see something when may not be something, but a couple hundred feet down, like I said, they heard those footsteps, behind them, and they stopped, and they literally, how it was described is they would literally take those steps, purposely walking, and then stop, and then it would still kind of, you'd hear it, taking additional steps, and by that time, it was over. It was right behind them. And they looked, and there was nothing there. They ended up running home scared. But I appreciate you sharing that story. That's one thing, you always have parents on saying, you better get home before dark. You don't know what's going to be out there. And that's a pretty good example of that. And, that's a great story because, you don't really know what it was. And, it might have been a shadow person, or could have been a Bigfoot, or... this story comes out of Jones area, and this person is Kickapoo, and so basically it was taken between Jones and Hara along the North Canadian River. And this is I'm going to tell exactly how this person told it to me, and so here we go. In July 2019, two friends and I decided to go ghost hunting. We were just bored. So I left Norman, picked my friends up in Tecumseh, and headed towards Jones. One of my friends grew up out there, and had a lot of ghost stories, sightings, and all types of things going on. Nothing happened. Side note: we were parked by the school where the boy. So I guess the side note is, so there was a documentary that came out that I had mentioned about the girl in the picture, and it has some locations here in Oklahoma. Well, they had parked next to the school where this boy was kidnapped. And I cannot for the life of me, I think it's in Jones, but I can't remember the name of that school. Anyways, but her friend remembers the kid going missing, and that when they grew up out there, There was this old brick building that they said that a witch lived in there, but she said she was stealing the kids, which is kind of interesting. But anyways, so nothing happened out there. So they drove further down the dirt road because they were so close to the river, and her friend asked if we wanted to go down there, and of course they did. So we parked the car and ended up walking through the trees and grass. It was summertime, and I remember it was such a nice night, full moon, and there wasn't really a breeze that I could remember while we were walking down to the river. When we got closer to the river, I walked down from my friends just to enjoy the night and the sounds. Out of nowhere, one of my friends then yells at us to come look. She had her phone flashlight on and was looking at the sand. I thought she was going to show us a dead fish or something, but it was But it was a crazy looking print. At first, I thought she made the print, and then I thought maybe somebody was down here before, jumped down, and made like a sliding print to make a big print. But I remember the first print was odd looking. Behind it, behind the hill, it had imprints of what I now believe was wet hair dragging. I don't know how else to describe it. It just looked odd. Then she walked closer up to the actual river and she found another one. This time of the other foot, it was more prominent. You could actually see the toes and the outline of the print, and it was so clear. My friend, who wore men's 13, put his foot against the print, and his foot looked so small compared to this print. It looked like this thing had walked straight into the water, probably crossed the water, but the bugs were making so much noise, so I don't think he was anywhere near us. And that's one thing I say too is like when Sasquatch is around, or Bigfoot, the entire everything goes quiet because the apex predator's there. So that's interesting. So my friend and I are looking at the print and we start taking pictures of it. One of my friends swipes his finger in the print. We freak out and ask, "What are you doing?" He said, "I don't know. I just see I just see how they do it in the shows." When he lifted his finger from the print, she had our flashlights on his finger, and there was reddish, like strands of reddish hair. He quickly dusted his hands off, and we decided it was time to get out of there. We climb up out of the riverbank and start making our way back to the road, to the car. Our guy friend was out in front, and my friend and I were in the back. I remember hearing voices / murmuring, and I didn't think much of it since there was houses, out there. It was almost 5 a.m., so I thought people were leaving for work. As soon as I thought these thoughts, my friend comes up behind me and grabs me, whispers frantically, "Go, go, 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 go! There's something behind me. Don't look, just go." And of course, I had to look at my side, and there was something in the grass moving. She said something had gone behind her, so we stopped walking. My other friend just kept walking along like nothing. My friend and I just stopped because these things were in the grass, running and hopping. At first, I thought these were rabbits, but then they stood up and started running. Man, I was gonna freak out because I knew what I was looking at. LP. Ooh, I got goosebumps after that. Golly. So they get just far enough away from us, and that my friend and I start walking. We see them run across the road in front of our other friend. Then both of us make our way back to the car, and the other friend is walking around the car inspecting it. We left drinks and had our windows down, and I kept watching these things running across the field into the dark. Man, I was terrified. We got out of the area and didn't talk about it until we got back into the lights of Shawnee. Turns out the male friend didn't even see the LPs running by him. I was wondering what that was about. For a long time, I wondered why we saw that and why there. The location we were at is actually a place where we do a lot of our ceremonies and have dances. So there's a lot of energy around there. I don't know if we disturbed it that night or what. I started to feel bad, like we did something wrong. So, pretty sure I mentioned before the issue. So the issues. So I had talked to this person, and we had talked about how they took pictures, and basically the phone that they that she took pictures with disappeared for like years. And she was always, she joked around that basically the Men in Black took my phone, or maybe it was the LPs, and that we were, for whatever reason. But she hadn't really told a lot of people about, that happened. But it's very strange. Then one day she went and looked at it, or went and looked in the drawer that it was supposed to be in, and it was there. So that's a pretty wicked story, I got goosebumps in the middle of that. And I had to stop, obviously you guys heard that, but like, man, that's to me one of my favorite stories I've heard, and it's pretty wicked because, I asked later on kind of, what it looked like, and she said that she honestly thought it was a rabbit. My logical brain said rabbit, and they were hopping and stood up, and they took off on two legs, and then when they crossed the pavement, I focused my eyes to try to get a better look, and they were definitely on two legs. I even asked the other ones if there's any small critters that ran on 2 feet. And I asked basically how high or how tall, and they said 2 to 3 feet. And then she, more background to the story, where that's at, is located right off that river. There's a lot of houses around this place too. So that's a pretty crazy story, and I appreciate this person, sharing this story, because that's for them to go to see, basically Bigfoot hairs, reddish Bigfoot hairs, to then see an LP. Man, you must have been out there wilding out. You had all the spirits, going crazy. But I appreciate you telling that story. That's a great story. This next story comes out of the Ozarks, out in Missouri. This story was sent to me. Like I said, I'm going to keep this person anonymous. A lot of these people, like I said, that's one thing about this. You can remain anonymous. The stories are going to be the stories. So I appreciate this person sharing the story. So, my family has had a cabin in the Ozarks in Missouri for a long time, and I would spend weeks down there with my grandparents. When I was about 5, I was picking blueberries along a path. It was only about 50 feet from the cabin, but I noticed something moving uphill. It was behind a tree, but it kind of stuck out on both sides, and it was really hairy. The face was human, but with bushy eyebrows, but not really any other hair that I could see. The skin was basically like a sun, kind of a bronze brown type of skin. I think when I walked to another tree, it blocked its view, and it was trying to see what I was up to. If it didn't keep moving, its head and shoulders from one side to if it didn't keep moving its head and shoulders from one side of the tree to the other, I don't think I would have noticed it. I went to the other side of the path and got behind a really big oak tree and then peeked out at it. My grandma called me, and when I looked back, it was gone. A lot of the property was surrounded by a lot of extended family, and often they invited their friends to hunt. It was unusual because no one should be near the cabins. Some of the guys had some really strange hunting outfits, so I just had to put it down as it being a hunter, since I saw it had hands. About a week or two later, my mom's cousin was on the hill playing horsey with his toddler, or was playing horsey with his toddler on his shoulders, and he was about 6'8" to 6'7", so he was a tall dude, and went by the spot where this thing was. He would have needed at least another toddler on top of his head to come close to how tall the creature was. I used to run around the woods there and return when my grandmother called me. Once she was in town 15 miles away, and I even heard her call me after she had passed. Kind of funny that it was probably a Bigfoot, because my ventures were always looking for billy goats that had died out in the late 40s to early 50s in that area. Had other strange things go on. My grandpa would take his kids to the river to tire us out, and we would play for hours on the gravel bar. Once we had been out there early in the day and came back after lunch to find a large tree sticking out into the water where we had been playing. It had a huge chunk of concrete on it, and where we went to look there was a doe pinned under the trunk, so it was submerged. No concrete for hundreds of feet. And that was part of a low water bridge. Also, the island gravel bar was all scrub brush. So I had no idea how big the tree got there or how that big tree got there. But my grandpa had us leave right away. My uncle also had some property several miles down the road, and I would mow the fence line in the orchard on a small riding lawnmower while my grandpa would go around digging out any thistles so the rest of the field could be brush hogged. It was supposed to be over 100 or so that day, and so we got early start around daybreak. I kept getting hit by acorns and pine cones and just figured out he was messing with me. But I saw him in the middle of the road, or I saw him in the middle of the field, and this was in the middle of nowhere, so you had to cross several cattle gates and 2 long fences to get to where I was. No pine trees in that area, so no idea where pine cones came from, but had several really good-sized bruises from it. Blackberries and peaches were ripe then, so maybe something was hungry and it thought we were being too noisy too early, but it never saw anything from the tree line. Never saw anything. When I saw that thing on the hill and went into the cabin, my great-grandmother said something to the effect of boogers. Friends where we were stationed had me listen to the Bigfoot Outlaws that Matt was hosting back in 2015, and a person on that show was from the South and called them boogers. It was an instant flashback and blew my mind. Wow. Man, wow. Yeah, that's one thing that's kind of crazy about some like a story like that is because, you saw something and your mind, immediately went to human. And to me, that is the most fascinating thing of like, if I saw something that was hairy in the woods and it had a human-like face, to me, that's kind of crazy. And like, I appreciate that story because, especially up there in Missouri and, that kind of wilderness country in the Ozarks. I've shared stories, of hearing people tell me stories when I was in the Ozarks. So, and to get the stuff thrown at you, and have that large concrete, or that large tree, basically being put in a place where like how can someone carry this tree in a matter of a couple hours? It would take a crane. The kind of topic of this live is Bigfoot and medicine, and we're revisiting that first or that second episode. I call it the first one because it's the first one that I started editing. The very first one. I don't think many people even heard it because I couldn't get it on multiple platforms, and I was having issues. But I posted the clip from Bigfootville on Facebook, and one thing about I kind of forgot, and when I was talking about the things that Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, whatever you want to call it, what they do, and there's a certain type of one that is kind of a Bigfoot that people call him Tall Man, but I'm not gonna. I almost said the name just now, but it's in Creek or I guess Seminole Creek, whatever but Creek is what I know it in, but it's makes you forget. And I had told a story on Bigfoot Crossroads about my dad's best friend who was driving. If you guys know, when you're driving into Tahlequah, there's the casino now, but before it used to be pasture. And on the other side was like a golf course. And there was one road that split up that pasture where the casino is now, and with the kind of a golf course / hill type. But there was one road that ran up there. I don't know, it may still be there. And he one night was driving, and he thought he saw something on the side of the road. He looked up and he's like, "Man, what is that?" And he ended up passing by it. And he looked in his rear view, and it was hairy, and it was tall. All he could see is about the forearms, and really couldn't see much, but he saw it was hairy, real hairy. And he looked, but like he forgot about it for a long time. And I had mentioned it kind of briefly to my dad, and then I had my dad mentioned it to him, and I mentioned it to him, and I said, "Man, you remember that story you told a long time ago?" He goes, "Man, I can't, man." And then one day it just dawned on him. He's like, "Yeah, I remember." But that's the one that they talk about. It makes you forget, and I think that's what he saw that night. And there's different spiritual aspects of Sasquatch and Bigfoot, and I think he does things that we can't explain. And I know Cherokees, we call it secret tribe, of people, and I fully believe that they know things beyond what we can interpret. And not everyone, like not every Indian's a medicine man, and not every medicine man is an Indian, and not every Bigfoot knows these things. I think it's the same way. I think it's that's how it is. Is there's only a certain few of them that know, and it's passed down, and they're like our elders, or the people that practice those things and heal people, and they do those things for them. And I think that's the same way with them. I look at them as a set of, almost like a set of people. And I know people go out there all the time and they're like, man, we got to kill, we got to get a body. We got to make sure these things are real. At the same time, we look at it from a point of view of, as a human being or something as, that's got, it's more than an animal. And I know that there's a lot of people in the Bigfoot community that believe it is an animal, which is fine, but at the same time, we don't know exactly what it is, but that's just kind of what I believe. What do you guys believe? Let me know in the chat. I got some people in here. I had a few people in here in the chat. Go ahead and put down what you believe it is. Is it a primate? Is it another set of man? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'd like to, or in the chat. I'd like to see what y'all think. But yeah, but they always talk about sometimes too that they're underground, and this is one thing we'll talk about with the cave system on this next episode. Episode 35 that's coming up tonight at midnight and if you're hearing this on the replay, it's Monday, the 21st or whatever. But we talk about a little bit of that, and a lot of older elders believe that they came from underground and they live underground. We think about those giants that they found in Kandahar, the giant that they found in Kandahar, or however the story goes. I feel like there's 19 million stories about that. Those things were underground. They were in caves. We look at the Paiutes. They basically had cornered a group of giants that were in caves. And I always kind of wonder what's in there, because we don't know. It's at the end of the day, we can play hypothetical, we can be straight up about it, but I believe that they do, they are underground. I know a lot of people think that they take the high ground too, is that they're on ridges and they have these what they call them, centurions that watch. They just basically just keep track of where everything's at. And so I don't know. Like I said, I want to know in the chat what you guys believe, because I think it's real interesting. But another thing I talked about on that episode, and I guess I'll preface this. One of my favorite scenes, and I think I mentioned this in the on the episode 2, Bigfoot and Medicine. Go back and listen to it. Was my favorite part is when they took Tim Harjo out. And they literally find a Bigfoot within that time that they were there. They found it one day, and you could see something kind of walking on the ridge, and it was just kind of moving real slow. But I thought that was real cool. But like I said, one of my favorite scenes is when he's like, stink, smell that, stink. On one of the episodes that I did, I think it was for my dad, I put that in there vaguely, just real quietly, just to see if anyone caught it. So if you caught it, let me know. But yeah, going back to that episode and revisiting that episode, another thing that I've heard just kind of in the community when it comes to that is that they can speak telepathically to people, and I never really quite understood that. I've seen multiple people say that they had encounters. Now, I don't know, some people be crazy, I really don't know about that, but I think somebody in the chat here, I think they could be that they travel between dimensions. This is kind of an interesting theory that kind of made me think. Martin Groves, he had a story that I heard on Confessionals podcast with Tony Merkel, and he had talked about that there was these dogmen coming after him and his buddy, and the story's really long, but basically that he could see off on the kind of the ridge, or the kind of the almost like a general or a commander sitting back and watching. It looked like they were kind of guiding these dogmen, and that kind of made me think. And the theory that I have kind of read on is that these Bigfoot are basically kind of the owner or the pet, or like the dogmen are pets to these Bigfoot, and they raise them. I just find that really interesting. That could be a possibility. Just based off that story. I have heard stories, and I have seen. I've heard multiple in the community that people talking about that they have went at it, which doesn't surprise me at all. And I go lie, that Oma gonna take it down. he gonna win. He gonna beat that wolf, that dog man. But I get stories about this all from time to time, and a story that always and I told a story like I said on this next episode. I don't want to ruin nothing for y'all, man. It's hard. It's really really hard to not ruin anything for y'all. But on episode 35, but I tell a story about an ex girlfriend of mine who had some creatures on her property, and I'll say she lived up in kind of north of Tahlequah, kind of headed towards Briggs. If y'all know where Briggs, America is, kind of headed out that way, kind of next to the river. And it also brings to mind a story that I had heard kind of growing up. My dad, he had told me a story or he had kind of mentioned that he believes that they go in and out of Merle Park, possibly, and that he had heard or something real heavy going by the house. And Merle Park is real creepy out there. And eventually, like, I'll tell some stories about my time there. And I have a really long story that was on Unsolved. Oh, it's not Unsolved, but Spirit Talkers. On one of the first episodes I was on. And shout out to those guys. New episodes are dropping soon for Spirit Talkers. Man, I just haven't been able to get over there. I got too much going on, and I know got some people ask about it, like, man, what are you abandoning us? Like, what you doing, man? We ain't heard nothing from you on there. I said, well, I'm here, I'm around, but that was kind of the belief that they kind of went in and out of that, because there's a creek that runs through there, and they always, kind of the ongoing thing is that they follow water. Another thing too that I think about when it comes to that medicine part of them is that people always talk about cloaking. And when you talk about cloaking, a lot of people think of Harry Potter. They think of that robe, that they put over, and he's just, invisible cloak, or things like that. But I think of it more of like the Predator, in a sense of, and it's not a technology. It's a technique. I would say it's a medicine, but that's not the phrase I want to use. But they know, and they know how to make themselves disappear. There's an old story about Chito Harjo, who's part of the snakes back in Eufaula days, back in the old days, and he could, when he was getting away from those soldiers and the prohibition police and all them, he'd disappear, and people never be able to find him. But he'd be right there, just right there, or he'd turn into a stump. And I think that's what they can do too. I think that they do those things to avoid us. And if you want to be found, you can be found. If you don't want to be found, you won't be found. And that's one thing that I was always taught. If you're looking for things, you're gonna find it. Or if you want to stay away from those things, they won't come near you. And so there's always things that about that medicine part for Sasquatch, for Bigfoot, that I always am very intrigued by. And I love it when I hear stories about Bigfoot kind of rocking with the drums at the grounds, or at the powwow, or stomp grounds. He's vibing out, like he's kind of swaying back and forth. And there was a story told at a live event that we did for Spirit Talkers back a year ago now, and he was staying on a reservation up north, and this guy, I'm not going to use his name because I ain't got his permission to say his name, but he had looked over, and the drum's going real strong, and he looked over and he could see that there was a Bigfoot, Sasquatch, kind of rocking out, kind of just swaying, like he was, kind of enjoying that, that beat, and kind of just walked away once it was over. And I always find that very interesting. Maybe because sometimes that drum has a healing effect. It really brings your spirit right, makes it right, and it makes you feel good about yourself, and it makes you, I know I felt it when we was at Pouring Power. I was like, man, start doing those dances now. But I think that it affects them. There's been multiple stories that I've heard. This is one out of Concho, and they saw one out there doing the same thing, kind of swaying with the beat, the drums. And I agree with Jessica in the chat. I couldn't imagine seeing that. I couldn't imagine looking over, and it's like, dang, you're looking over and see one of your relatives. No. Dang, one of the hairy man, one of y'all's relatives is what it is. No.
But I couldn't imagine seeing it either. And that's a great story. That's a great story when you talk about those them showing up at the grounds. And like I said, I think there's something to that. I think that they know. Another thing too is I heard a story one time that they're out there speaking Cherokee. It's just come from off the Cherokee Res, and it's an old story, but they speak Cherokee, and they, maybe the ones that are there in that area, they know and they understand. They understand that what's being said, and I found that real cool. That maybe, like I said, I mean, it's maybe like each territory too. Like, they always talk about, I guess each tribe has their own language or a semblance of their own language, and maybe that's the same thing as that each, they know they have their own, type of language, but I think that's real cool to know that they was out there speaking it and they could understand it. And one other thing too about the kind of the bad ones, the ones that make you forget. For a long time, tribes have been telling Europeans and white folks that you don't go to those areas because that's the devil's mountain. That's the over here is the devil's cave, or the evil place. They always tell, and a lot of those times it's those ones that make you forget that are there, and they terrorize. We don't ever know where those places are nowadays because we built cities on them and we built towns on those places. And a lot of those places that were talked about are still around, but they're not as prevalent in today's society and what we know. But